Reformation Day! Come along, gents.
Shall we sing the 46th Psalm?
Let's! I festa Burg ist Luther, ein guter Herrenvater.
A mighty fortress is our God, a trusty shield and weapon, a bulwark never failing, a safe stronghold, a strong tower, a mountain fastness, and a panoply. Whatever a panoply is, this hymn has become a sort of a rallying cry for a multitude of Protestant churches across the world. Ironically, many have put their own flair on its presentation. But to find out how we've gotten to this point, we need to look back at the creator of this hymn, our favorite reformer, Martin Luther.
Martin Luther was born in the town of Eisleben in Germany to two peasants, Hans and Margaret Luther. He was baptized...
Hold on. Okay, look, Martin Luther's life story has been hashed and rehashed so many times that there's enough material out there to keep you busy for months, if not years. If you're not familiar with most of Luther's life, there's plenty of research that you can find elsewhere. For our purposes, let's just hit up some of his greatest hits. He had a decent education, entered a monastery, was ordained as a priest, posted his 95 theses, spoke out against the abuses of the Catholic Church, was told to recant, didn't recant, got himself excommunicated, was declared an outlaw of the empire, went into hiding, translated the New Testament into German, wrote the large and small catechisms, aided in writing the Augsburg Confession, published the complete German Bible, and died in his hometown of Eisleben in 1546. Whew! Now that we're all caught up with Martin Luther the Reformer, why don't we double back and discuss one of his less well-known sides, Martin Luther the musician. Roll it! Luther grew up in 1400s Germany, where music had become very common. Children and adults alike learned how to sing, mostly so they could join in their church choir. As a young man attending Latin school in Eisenach, Martin sang in a student choir and studied music theory. It was also common for boys to form beggars' choirs as a way to earn money. These were the early ancestors of modern Christmas carolers. Bah! Humbug! It is believed that Luther took part in one of these as well. During his time at the university in Erfurt, Luther studied theology, voice, and composition. He also became adept at playing the lute and the German flute. So as you can see, Martin Luther was no slouch when it came to the realm of music. Even so, there are those who don't believe that he was capable of composing such complex tunes such as this, and in turn simply stole existing tunes from places like folk songs or tavern songs, or even made this song up piecemeal from bits of the Roman gradual. While Martin likely frequented his local taverns, and in doing so may have drawn some inspiration from the local songs, it is generally accepted that Luther's musical prowess would have been more than sufficient to produce a more complex tune such as Ein Festeburg, and so his role as composer is typically no longer called into question. In his day, Luther translated a number of psalms into German for use in singing, such as Ein Festeburg, which comes from Psalm 46. Even though Christ isn't mentioned specifically by name in that psalm, Luther was careful to keep Christ and his salvation at the center of his focus, while many other translators were more concerned with a word-for-word translation. As to when he began to write this hymn, that's a bit of a hot debate. The original theory was that Luther started writing it for his trial at the Diet of Worms in 1521. The story goes that Luther and his entourage sang out this hymn loudly and proudly on the morning that Martin was going to be tried. Heinrich Heine describes it thus.
The old cathedral trembled at these new notes, and the ravens were startled in the hidden nests in the towers. This hymn has preserved its potent spell even to our days.
As inspiring as this story might be, the truth is, Luther probably did not write this hymn until years later. Otherwise, it likely would have been included in his hymn book back in 1524, from which it is noticeably absent. Show them the other theory. Another theory that fits better within the timeline is that Luther took to writing because of how distraught he was, due to religious and political issues that were going on. The Moors were beginning to invade, Rome was being sacked, and there were certain rulers who were violently opposed to Luther's teachings. On top of all of this, Luther's good friend Leonhard Kaiser was tried and burned as a heretic by one of the staunch Catholic rulers of the time.
Niemand erwartet die deutsche Inquisition.
This theory asserts that following Kaiser's death in August of 1527, Luther put pen to paper and finished the hymn by November. While there may be some merit to this theory, the threads connecting it to Luther are a bit thin, so most scholars don't believe that this is entirely correct either. Roll number 3. Another theory is that Luther wrote the hymn to be sung at the 1530 Diet of Augsburg, when Philip Melanchthon delivered the Augsburg Confession. However, most authorities on the subject believe that Luther had written it a year prior and had intended it to be sung at the 1529 Diet of Speyer, when the German princes lodged their official protest against the Catholic Church in the Empire, and thus earned themselves the name of Protestants. Thoroughly confused yet? Good, because we're just getting started. Regardless of when exactly Martin Luther wrote this hymn, we still need to look at how we get from Ein Festeburg to the mighty fortress that we know today. And that means we need to talk translations. And to do that, we need to change the scenery. Most Christian hymns were not written in English, but were written in German for the Protestants or Latin for the Catholics. That means that there was one, sometimes a few translators involved. Most hymns have a small handful of English translations, with one or two of them being the most prominently used. Ein Festeburg, however, has not one and not two, but a minimum of 70 translations. 70 translations. Let's take a look at a few of them. Our God is a defense and tower. A tower of safety is our God, his sword. A mighty castle is God is our refuge, city strong. Strong tower and refuge is our God, right goodly. A fast set bulwark is our God. A moveless fastness is our God. Tell you what, let's start simple. The first recorded English translation was Our God is a Defense and Tower by Miles Coverdale in 1539. It wasn't widely used. The first English translation that was widely used was J.C. Jacoby's 1722 translation, God is our refuge in distress, our strong defense. While these two translations fell out of use, one that has stood the test of time is an 1853 translation by one Frederick Henry Hedge. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Hedge's translation is the one used by most denominations. It's used by Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Unitarians, even the Roman Catholics. Not so much the Lutherans, but we'll talk about them a little later. There's good reason why Hedge's translation has worked its way into such a position of prominence. Hedge himself was a brilliant man, educated at Harvard as well as in Germany, became a Unitarian pastor, was appointed professor of ecclesiastical history at Cambridge, Massachusetts, and professor of German literature at Harvard. In 1853, he published his translation of A Mighty Fortress, as well as two translated selections from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust. Hedge's translation, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, is considered by many to be the most effective for congregational use, but not necessarily the most accurate to the source material. That title goes to the 1831 translation, A Safe Stronghold, Our God Is Still, by Thomas Carlyle. If you're familiar with the Lutheran hymnal, either Missouri Synod or Wisconsin Synod, odds are you're more familiar with Carlyle's translation than you might think. The translation that we Lutherans use is actually a composite translation. It's mostly comprised of Thomas Carlyle's translation, but adding in portions of an 1863 translation by William M. Reynolds, and borrowing the first line from Hedges' famous translation. The result is the version known by most Lutherans. This hybrid translation was first published back in 1868, when it appeared in the Pennsylvania Lutheran Church Book. It then made its way into the Hymns of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Stop. Get this old windbag out of here. Here's the long and the short of it. In the early days of the Missouri Synod, the language of choice for services was German, like the Catholics were using Latin. And that meant that those German Lutherans kept the original lyrics of Ein Festgeburt. At the same time, though, there were English-speaking Lutheran congregations out there, and they used Carlyle's hybrid version of the hymn. In 1911, when those English-speaking Lutherans joined with the German-speaking Missouri Synod Lutherans, those wacky Englishmen brought with them that hybrid translation that Carlyle put together, thus making it appear in most Lutheran hymnals ever since. Now it's time for us to turn the page. The vast majority of Lutheran hymnals that are published today include the old composite translation, which we've been talking about. But they also include a second version of the hymn, which, in the case of our Missouri Synod Lutheran Service Book, is a translation that was done in the 1970s. Now, keen listeners might notice a slight difference between the meters of both of these hymns. One is rhythmic, almost syncopated. And the other, isometric, or a more steady style. The second version, or the isometric, is credited in Missouri Synod hymnals to Johann Sebastian Bach. While Bach may have been the one to put pen to paper and actually write the arrangement, this was around for a lot longer than that. We'll get to that in a moment.
So why do we tend to use the rhythmic version versus the isometric version?
Well, it has to do with a man by the name of C.F.W. Walther. As the first Missouri Synod president, Walther was a key player in the early Lutheran Church in America. It was under Walther's leadership that the Missouri Synod continued their use of German in their services. Walther, a bit of a traditionalist, took issue with many of the musical trends that had worked their way into the Protestant church. In an ill-advised attempt to be less Catholic, music in the post-Reformation church started to be restricted to an a cappella singing style of hymns and psalms, some churches going so far as to dismantle their organs and disband their choirs. As years went on, this a cappella singing began to wear down the vitality that the music had at one time, rendering it slow and methodical, which led to the isometric arrangement we know today. Walther despised what had become of church music and sought to restore hymns to their original glory. He published a hymnal that emphasized rhythmic singing, and his congregation held regular rehearsals to properly learn how to sing these hymns. So as Walther became the first president of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the Missouri Synod became one of the first groups to use Martin Luther's original rhythmic tune. Amen. A mighty fortress is our God, a trusty shield and weapon, a city of our strength, a refuge and strong fence, a tower of safety. No matter how you translate it, it is one of the most renowned hymns to come out of the Reformation. Hey, Martin, let's go get us some candy.